Rain fell the night Laura Benton disappeared, the kind of Portland rain that never fully stops, just thickens into a whisper or a wall. At 11:42 p.m. on March 17, 2014, a call came through to dispatch. "My wife's in labor. We need the midwife now." The caller's tone was desperate, trembling, and slightly slurred. Laura was already on her way. Her Subaru Outback, the same one she'd used for over a decade of home births, glided through the slick streets of East Portland. In the back seat lay a neatly organized birthing kit, towels, clamps, scissors, essential oils, and a small teddy bear she always brought for good luck. She'd been a midwife for 15 years. Beloved, reliable, and calm under pressure, Laura Benton had ushered more than 300 babies into the world. Her patients adored her. The nurses who sometimes clashed with her independence still respected her precision. And yet, that night, as she drove beneath the amber streetlights, something gnawed at her nerves, an unease she couldn't explain. Her husband, Eric, would later tell detectives that she paused before leaving. "She stood in the doorway for a long time," he said. "Almost like she was deciding whether to go." The address was familiar, the Mitchell residence, a new couple expecting their first child. Laura had met them twice. The husband, Daniel Mitchell, was charming, confident, and oddly evasive about his work. The wife, Hannah, was timid but trusting. Laura sensed tension between them but told herself it was normal. Expectant fathers often grew restless near due dates. She arrived at 12:06 a.m. The street was dark and silent except for the rhythmic hiss of rain on concrete. She rang the doorbell. No answer. Then, faintly, from inside, a moan, the unmistakable sound of labor. Laura entered. The door was unlocked. What happened next would never be fully known. At 2:18 a.m., a neighbor called 911 after hearing a loud thud followed by a baby's cry. When paramedics arrived, they found the living room in chaos, blankets on the floor, blood-stained towels, an overturned lamp. Hannah Mitchell lay unconscious but breathing. A newborn, slick and wailing, was wrapped in a towel beside her. There was no sign of Laura Benton. Her car was still parked outside, keys in the ignition, headlights dim from battery drain. Her phone sat on the passenger seat. The last text message sent at 12:19 a.m. read simply, "You shouldn't have seen that." No one knew who it was sent to. Detective Marcus Ralston was called in before dawn. He'd seen plenty of missing persons cases, but something about this one didn't fit the usual script. "People vanish every day," he told his partner, "but they don't leave a half-delivered baby behind." Inside the Mitchell home, every detail screamed contradiction. The baby was healthy, perfectly delivered, umbilical cord cut, airway cleared. Laura's touch was unmistakable. And yet, her absence felt deliberate, as if she'd stepped out mid-procedure and never looked back. The husband, Daniel, was hysterical at first, or performed hysteria well. She just disappeared," he insisted, pacing, eyes darting. "I ran downstairs to grab towels and when I came back, she was gone." Detectives noted the faint smell of alcohol on his breath, the bruises beginning to form on his knuckles. "What happened before that?" Ralston pressed. Daniel hesitated. "Nothing. She said the baby was coming faster than expected." Hannah screamed, and then everything went black. The medical team later confirmed that Hannah Mitchell had sustained a head injury inconsistent with a simple fall. It looked like she'd been struck, one ER nurse whispered, but the husband said she fainted. By sunrise, the Benton case was headline news. Portland midwife vanishes during home birth, baby survives. At home, Eric Benton sat on the couch, staring at the muted television. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras glinting like insects. Their daughter, Lily, only 12, asked, "Is Mom helping another baby?" Eric couldn't answer. Detectives searched Laura's home office. Her calendar ended abruptly on March 17, no future appointments. But tucked inside her patient files was something stranger, a sealed envelope labeled, "In case of emergency." Inside, a handwritten note read, "If I disappear, tell them to look closer at who calls for help." Ralston reread the line 5 times, his pen hovering over his notebook. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. And then there was her phone. Forensic technicians recovered fragments of deleted messages, partial sentences, names, a location ping near Forest Park for exactly 6 minutes between midnight and 1 a.m. Why she'd stopped there, no one knew. That night, Ralston stood alone by the Willamette River. The rain had eased, leaving a low mist curling along the banks. He replayed the facts, the unlocked door, the silent husband, the missing midwife. Something didn't add up. He muttered to himself, midwives don't run. They stay until the cry stops. But Laura Benton had run, or been made to. And somewhere in Portland, someone knew exactly why. In the days that followed, tips flooded in, sightings of a woman matching Laura's description near bus stations, diners, even a motel off I-84. Each lead dissolved into fog. Her face appeared on every news channel, every missing poster, her smile frozen in that bright, steady calm that made people trust her. But behind that smile, it turned out, was a secret, one so dangerous she'd vanish into the night rather than speak it aloud. A week after her disappearance, police received one final anonymous letter. No return address. No signature. Just 5 words written in neat, slanted handwriting. She saw what she shouldn't. The morning after Laura Benton's disappearance, Portland felt hungover, not from drink, but from disbelief. Every news station played the same footage, police tape fluttering in the rain, paramedics carrying the newborn, reporters shouting questions that no one answered. Detective Marcus Ralston hadn't slept. He stood in the cramped conference room of the Portland Police Bureau, staring at a whiteboard already crowded with photos, Laura smiling beside mothers and babies, Hannah Mitchell in a hospital bed, pale but alive, and Daniel Mitchell, eyes red, jaw set, the picture of performative grief. Ralston uncapped a marker. Timeline, he muttered, scrawling across the board. Call from Mitchell, 11:42 p.m. Laura leaves home, 11:55. Arrives, 12:06. 911 call from neighbor, 2:18 a.m. Paramedics find baby, unconscious mother, no midwife. His partner, Detective Evelyn Tran, leaned against the doorframe sipping burnt coffee. Husband says he ran downstairs for towels, she said. We found towels right next to the bed. Ralston exhaled. So he lied. They had no proof, just instincts honed over too many cases where people lied before breakfast. That afternoon, they interviewed Hannah Mitchell. She was barely conscious, her voice thin and broken. Do you remember what happened that night? Ralston asked softly. Her eyes fluttered open. Laura, she was helping me breathe. Daniel came in. He'd been drinking. He was angry, said something about a phone call she took. He said she shouldn't be here. What call? I don't know, Hannah whispered. She looked scared. Ralston glanced at Tran. Scared wasn't a word used lightly to describe Laura Benton. When they spoke to Daniel later that day, he denied everything. He wept, perfectly timed tears, insisting he'd only stepped away for a moment. She must have gone outside for air, he said. Maybe she slipped in the rain. Ralston studied him. You think she went outside in the middle of a birth, barefoot, leaving her kit and her car behind? Daniel's face tightened. You don't know what she was like. No, Ralston said quietly, but you did. The next 48 hours were chaos. Search parties scoured the woods near Forest Park, where Laura's phone had last pinged. Volunteers combed the underbrush, calling her name, their flashlights slicing through mist. Helicopters swept overhead. Nothing. Reporters feasted on every rumor, that Laura had been having an affair, that she'd stolen prescription drugs, that she'd joined a birthing cult in the Cascades. Talk radio hosts speculated she'd faked her disappearance. The tabloids called her the vanishing midwife. Ralston hated the circus. They always turn victims into villains, he said to Tran, tossing a newspaper aside. Tran raised an eyebrow. You think she's a victim? I think she saw something that scared her enough to run. Maybe she was right too. 5 days later, a new clue surfaced. A woman named Cara Delaney called the tip line, claiming she'd worked with Laura at a birthing center years earlier. She told me once, Cara said, that she'd had trouble with a patient's husband, someone politically connected. He threatened to have her license revoked if she reported him. Said his family owned the board. The board? Ralston asked. The Oregon Health Licensing Board. The people who approve midwives. Laura said it was full of favors and money. She never trusted them after that. Ralston wrote the words Health Licensing Board in thick red marker on the whiteboard. Could be nothing, Tran said. Or everything, he replied. The investigation soon ran into walls, invisible ones. Warrants took longer to approve. Calls to the board went unreturned. When Ralston requested Daniel Mitchell's phone records, his supervisor, Captain Hensley, called him into his office. "Drop it," Hensley said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Drop it? A woman's missing." Hensley sighed. "And a senator's son is under suspicion. You really want that heat?" Ralston froze. "Senator? Daniel Mitchell. His father is Senator Patrick Mitchell. You didn't know?" No, he hadn't. But it explained the sudden silence, the retracted statements, the pressure not to dig deeper. Ralston left the office fuming. "You smell that?" he said to Tran. "That's politics. And it stinks." Tran's eyes narrowed. "So, we're supposed to pretend the midwife vanished into thin air?" Ralston's jaw clenched. Not a chance. The following week, he visited Hannah again. She was stronger now, holding her baby, a girl she'd named Grace. "She saved us," Hannah said quietly. "Laura. She delivered my baby even after Daniel hit me." "Hit you?" Ralston leaned forward. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "He said she was calling someone." He grabbed the phone. They argued. "I heard her say, 'You can't hide this.'" Then everything went black. Ralston's pulse quickened. "You're sure about that?" "Those were her words." She nodded. He looked out the hospital window, the rain streaking down like ink. The puzzle was forming, a midwife who saw something, a husband with political power, a health board wrapped in silence. That night, Ralston sat in his car outside the Mitchell residence. The house glowed softly through the fog, its blinds half-drawn. He watched as Daniel Mitchell stepped out onto the porch, speaking into his phone. "I told you, it's handled," Daniel snapped. "No, she's gone. You made sure of that." Ralston gripped his steering wheel. The words were faint, half-swallowed by distance, but enough to make his blood run cold. He raised his camera and took a photo, Daniel silhouetted in porch light, phone pressed to his ear, arrogance etched into his posture. Back at the station, Ralston and Tran compiled the evidence. But every time they submitted a report linking Daniel Mitchell to Laura's disappearance, it came back redacted, pages missing. "It's like someone's erasing the case in real time," Tran muttered. Ralston nodded grimly. "They're protecting him. Or someone bigger." A month after Laura vanished, the investigation was officially suspended. "Insufficient evidence," the statement read. Ralston stared at the notice on his desk, fury simmering under his calm exterior. She didn't vanish. She was erased. He packed his notes into a folder labeled Benton, closed and slipped it into his bottom drawer. "Someday," he whispered, "someone's going to open that drawer again." Outside, Portland moved on. Babies were born, lives continued, and Laura Benton's name faded from the headlines. But not from memory. 8 years later, a journalist named Nina Clark would do what the police couldn't, and find the woman the system wanted everyone to forget. 8 years after Laura Benton vanished, Portland had changed, glass towers where old warehouses once stood, coffee shops where people discussed politics like religion, and a generation that barely remembered the name that once haunted the headlines. But every so often, her story resurfaced. On true crime forums, in late-night podcasts, whispered over craft beers. The midwife who disappeared during a birth. Most called it a tragedy. Others, a cover-up. And then there were a few, the stubborn, curious few, who called it unfinished business. One of them was Nina Clark. At 32, Nina had the restless energy of someone who distrusted quiet. A freelance journalist with a reputation for poking where she wasn't invited, she'd written exposés on city contracts, environmental scandals, and most recently, a feature titled, "The Mothers Portland Forgot." It was that article that led her to a message in her inbox one foggy February morning. The subject line read, "You should look into the Benton case again." No name. No details. Just a grainy attachment, a photo of a woman in a sunlit garden, cradling a child. Her face half-turned, older, weathered, but unmistakably Laura Benton. Nina stared at it for a long time, her coffee cooling beside her laptop. "Impossible," she whispered. She'd be 50 now. She opened a new tab and searched Laura Benton missing midwife. The familiar headlines appeared, yellowed by time but still chilling. She scrolled past them, past the theories and Reddit speculation, until she landed on an old Portland Tribune quote. She saw something she shouldn't have, Detective Marcus Ralston had said in 2014. And someone made sure we never found out what it was. Nina clicked the photo again, zooming in until the pixels blurred. In the corner, behind the woman, was a sign barely visible. Alicia, Women's Cooperative, Taos, New Mexico. By March, Nina was in her car, heading south through Oregon's high desert, chasing a ghost. Her editor had called her reckless. "You're chasing an urban legend," he said. "Maybe," she'd replied. "But legends start somewhere real." She drove for 16 hours, watching the terrain shift from emerald forests to red canyons and dry wind. By the time she reached Taos, her car was coated in dust and her brain in adrenaline. The Alicia Cooperative sat 15 miles out of town, a collection of adobe houses tucked against the mesas. There were no signs of fences, no men, and no phone service. When she arrived, several women looked up from tending a vegetable garden, wary but calm. "I'm looking for someone," Nina said, holding up the photo. "Her name's Laura Benton." The women exchanged glances. One, older and stoic, finally spoke. "We don't use names here. Just peace." "I'm not here to cause trouble," Nina said gently. "I think she might want her story back." The woman's eyes softened, but her lips stayed sealed. "Wait here." Nina waited in the golden light of late afternoon, the air thick with sage and silence. A bell chimed somewhere in the distance, soft and deliberate. Then, from one of the adobe houses, a figure appeared. She wore a linen dress and sandals. Her hair, once dark, was now streaked with silver. She moved slowly but with unmistakable grace. When she stepped closer, Nina's heart hammered. It was her. Laura Benton. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the junipers, and time folded in on itself. "You found me," Laura said finally. Her voice was lower, rougher, but steady. "I wasn't the first to look," Nina replied. Laura gave a faint, almost weary smile. "Then you're the first who found." Inside Laura's modest room, the air smelled faintly of lavender and candle wax. On the wall hung a hand-woven tapestry, a mother holding a child, surrounded by flames. Nina clicked on her recorder. "Can we start with where you've been?" Laura hesitated. "Do you really want to know? Sometimes truth costs more than silence." "I'm willing to pay," Nina said. Laura studied her. "I paid with everything." For hours, the two women talked. Laura recounted fragments of that night in Portland, the birth, the shouting, the sound of something breaking, then the sudden presence of men in dark suits. "They told me I'd seen what didn't happen," she said quietly. "That if I spoke, my license would be gone, my husband investigated, my daughter taken. And then one of them showed me a photo of my house, at midnight. They knew where Lily slept." Nina shivered. "So you ran?" "I didn't have a choice." "But you didn't just vanish." Laura looked out the window at the red horizon. "I had help. Women like me, nurses, therapists, social workers, all of us who saw too much and were told to shut up. This place became a refuge." "Alicia," Nina whispered. "Yes. It means freedom." Nina paused her recorder. "Laura, why now? Why let me find you?" Laura turned back, eyes filled with something between defiance and fatigue. "Because they're still doing it. Silencing, threatening, covering up. The same men, the same names. And I'm tired of being quiet." Nina's pulse quickened. "You're saying this wasn't just about your disappearance, it's systemic?" Laura nodded. "The Health Licensing Board. They're not regulators, they're gatekeepers. You cross the wrong person, you lose your livelihood. And the Mitchells? They're connected to everyone who profits from that silence." The next morning, Nina walked through the commune as the sun rose. Women were tending goats, painting, laughing softly. A strange peace lived here, the kind that comes only after surviving storms. But Nina couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. When she returned to her car, she found a note tucked under the windshield wiper. It was written in neat, slanted handwriting, the same style from the anonymous letter 8 years ago. "Be careful what you bring back to life." Her throat tightened. Someone still cared about keeping Laura Benton's story buried. Before leaving, Nina turned to Laura. "If I tell this story, they'll come for you." "They already did," Laura said softly. "Let them come again. I'm not running anymore." Nina hesitated. Then I'll make them listen. As she drove away from the commune, the desert stretched endlessly before her, silent, ancient, and complicit. Somewhere in that stillness, she knew, a reckoning had begun. The drive back to Alicia was different the second time. Gone was the journalistic thrill, the pulse of discovery. This time, Nina Clark felt the weight of what she carried, a story that could shatter powerful lives. She had spent 2 weeks back in Portland verifying every scrap Laura had given her. The senator's son, Daniel Mitchell, had vanished from public life after a suspicious rehab retreat. The Oregon Health Licensing Board had quietly replaced 3 senior members. And buried deep in public archives, Nina found a set of sealed documents, complaints filed by midwives, all dismissed on the same date, 1 week after Laura's disappearance in 2014. They had all named the same man. The afternoon she returned, the air in New Mexico shimmered with heat. The adobe walls of Alicia glowed like embers beneath the sun. Women moved through the courtyards with the serene rhythm of those who had remade their lives by hand, watering gardens, grinding corn, painting symbols on pottery. But when Nina's car appeared on the dusty road, conversation halted. The women recognized her. They remembered what happened the last time a stranger came asking about the past. A tall woman with braids, the one who had greeted her before, stepped forward. "Back so soon?" she asked. Her voice was neither welcoming nor hostile, just measured. "I had to see Laura," Nina said. "It's important." The woman studied her for a moment before nodding toward the courtyard. "She's by the well." Laura Benton was drawing water when Nina found her. Her sleeves were rolled up, her silver-streaked hair tied loosely, her bare feet coated in dust. "You came back," she said, smiling faintly. "You knew I would," Nina replied. "You gave me too many unanswered questions." Laura leaned on the well's edge, looking at her reflection in the water. "And what did you find?" "Enough to know you weren't the only one they silenced." Laura nodded. "No, I wasn't." Inside the commune's meeting hall, they sat at a long wooden table surrounded by women who looked both wary and fierce. Some were young, others older, but all carried the quiet authority of survivors. Laura introduced them one by one, Alicia's founders. There was Dr. Harper Lee, an obstetrician who'd lost her license after exposing insurance fraud. Marisol Vega, a social worker who testified against a domestic violence shelter's fund mismanagement. And Ruth Chen, a nurse practitioner whose clinic was raided after she refused to falsify medical records for a senator's nephew. They had all run. They had all built Alicia together. Nina set her recorder down. "You're telling me the commune isn't just a refuge. It's a witness protection system for women who got too close to the truth." Ruth spoke first, her tone calm but edged. "We protect each other because no one else will." "Do you have proof?" Nina asked. Dr. Lee leaned forward. "We are the proof." As night fell, the desert cooled. Candles flickered in the hall. Nina listened as Laura finally filled in the missing hours of that night in 2014, every detail the world never heard. "When Daniel came home, he was drunk," Laura said softly. "He accused me of judging him. Hannah tried to calm him, but he struck her. She fell. The baby was crowning, I had no choice but to keep delivering." Her hands trembled. When it was over, she wasn't breathing. "I was trying to help her when 2 men entered the house. They wore suits. They knew my name. One of them whispered, 'You didn't see anything tonight, Mrs. Benton. Go home, forget this.'" "And you didn't?" Nina asked. Laura smiled faintly. "I tried. Until they sent me photos of my daughter's school." The room fell silent. "They said if I spoke, my family would suffer. So I ran. Ruth helped me. Alicia took me in." Nina sat back, her pulse pounding. The scope of it was staggering, an underground network built not by criminals, but by women forced to disappear for survival. But she also knew what came next. "If I publish this, they'll come for you all." "They already did," Dr. Lee said calmly. "We just stopped answering the door." Nina hesitated. "You don't want revenge?" Laura met her eyes. "We want truth. Revenge rots. Truth rebuilds." After midnight, Nina lay awake in her guest room. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the cracks. Somewhere nearby, a coyote called. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She answered. "Miss Clark," a man's voice said, calm, professional, and unmistakably threatening. "We hear you've been speaking with someone who prefers to stay dead." Her mouth went dry. "Who is this?" "You don't need my name. Just understand, stories like hers end badly for the storytellers." Then silence. Nina stared into the dark. The phone call was confirmation. Laura's story was bigger than she'd feared, and closer to danger than she'd imagined. The next morning, Laura found her at the well again, staring into the water. "They called you," Laura said quietly. Nina nodded. "They know." Laura took a deep breath. "Then it's begun." "What has?" "The part where they try to bury the truth all over again." Before leaving Alicia, Nina turned back to the group of women. "Will you stand with me if I publish this?" They exchanged glances. Then Ruth said, "We've hidden long enough. If you speak, we'll speak too." Laura placed a hand on Nina's shoulder. "Just remember, when you expose men like them, they don't fight fair." "I'm counting on it," Nina replied. As she drove away, a dust storm swirled across the horizon, fierce and blinding. Behind her, Alicia shimmered like a mirage, a sanctuary born of silence, now preparing for war. That night, as she crossed back into Oregon, Nina opened her laptop at a roadside motel and began typing the first lines of her exposé. 8 years ago, a midwife vanished from Portland. The truth didn't die with her, it went underground, and it's time it rose again. She hit save. Outside, the neon sign buzzed, flickering between vacancy and NO. A fitting metaphor, she thought, for the space between truth and disappearance. When Nina Clark's article went live, it hit Portland like a thunderclap. Headline: "The Missing Midwife Speaks, How Power, Politics, and Silence Buried the Truth." Within hours, the story exploded across social media. Every news network picked it up, though most added their own cautious caveats: alleged, unverified, anonymous sources. But the image that accompanied it, Laura Benton, older now, standing in front of the Alicia commune, eyes steady, unflinching, needed no caption. For 8 years, she had been a ghost. Now she was the voice that wouldn't die. Detective Marcus Ralston saw the article over morning coffee. He nearly dropped his mug. "Benton," he muttered. "Alive?" He read every word, every quote, twice. The memory of that whiteboard from 2014, her photo under missing, flashed through his mind like a ghost tapping on glass. Ralston had retired 3 years ago, bitter and disillusioned after his case was buried by politics. Now, for the first time in years, he felt something like adrenaline. He grabbed his keys. "Guess I'm not done yet," he said. By noon, the governor's office had issued a statement calling the claims deeply concerning. By 3, the Oregon Health Licensing Board had gone offline. By 5, Senator Patrick Mitchell's legal team released a terse denial. "Our family had no involvement in any alleged disappearance. These defamatory claims are politically motivated." But by midnight, leaked internal emails told a different story, signed off by a board official who had also donated heavily to the senator's campaign. One email read, "The Benton case needs to stay cold. We cannot afford fallout during re-election season." The cover-up had a paper trail. And Nina Clark had just lit the match. That same night, Nina sat in her apartment, phone buzzing nonstop. Requests for interviews. Death threats. Book offers. Her inbox looked like a war zone. She stared at the screen, heart racing. "This isn't just a story," she whispered. "It's a reckoning." The doorbell rang. When she opened it, Detective Ralston stood there, older, gray-haired, but still carrying the same quiet intensity. "You must be Nina Clark," he said. "You've just woken the beast." They sat in her kitchen as rain pattered against the windows, Portland's eternal soundtrack. "I read your article," Ralston said. "You were right about everything. But there's more." He pulled a faded folder from his coat. On it, in his handwriting, were 2 words, "Benton, closed." He slid it across the table. "I never stopped digging." Inside were copies of evidence he'd hidden from the department before the case was shut down. Photographs of Daniel Mitchell's bruised knuckles. The deleted text from Laura's phone, "You shouldn't have seen that." And a report from a forensic tech that never made it into the official file, one showing traces of blood on the Mitchell's staircase that didn't belong to either Daniel or Hannah. Ralston's voice was steady. "They told me to destroy this. I didn't." Nina stared at the papers, her pulse hammering. You kept the truth in a drawer for 8 years? Sometimes justice just needs a longer fuse, he said. The next morning, Nina and Ralston drove to a downtown television studio. Laura had agreed, reluctantly, to appear live. It would be her first time speaking publicly since her disappearance. As the lights came on, the room fell silent. The interviewer began softly. Laura Benton, where have you been for the past 8 years? Laura's eyes glistened. Running from men who thought power could erase consequence. And why come forward now? Because silence is how they win, she said. And I'm done losing. Her voice was calm, deliberate, hauntingly precise. She described the night Daniel Mitchell struck his wife, the arrival of the suited men, the threats, the flight. Then she added something she'd never told anyone, not even Nina. One of the men who came to the house, she said, wasn't a stranger. He was a state health official, someone from the licensing board. I'd met him before at a conference. He told me I'd seen an unfortunate accident. He said if I loved my daughter, I'd disappear. The interviewer froze. Do you remember his name? Laura nodded slowly. Yes. Dr. Edward Voss. For a moment, the studio was silent except for the faint hum of the cameras. Voss was the sitting chairman of the Oregon Health Licensing Board. By the time the segment ended, the internet had erupted. Within an hour, Voss's biography was scrubbed from the state website. By evening, 2 whistleblowers from the board had come forward, confirming years of intimidation and document tampering. It was no longer just about one missing midwife. It was about a system built on coercion, cover-ups, and quiet complicity. Meanwhile, in his mansion on the west side of Portland, Senator Patrick Mitchell watched the broadcast with a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. His son, Daniel, sat opposite him, pale and sweating. You told me she was gone, the senator hissed. I thought she was. Daniel stammered. They said she was taken care of. The senator slammed the glass onto the table. You have no idea what you've done. Outside, reporters were already gathering at the gate. For the first time in years, the Mitchell family's power was cracking. Back at her apartment, Nina received another anonymous message. No photo this time. Just 3 words. You're next, Clark. Her hands trembled, but she didn't delete it. Instead, she saved it, evidence for the file she and Ralston were now building together. The next morning, they met Laura at a quiet diner near the river. The sun cut through the fog, a rare golden slice of Portland brightness. They'll try to paint me as unstable, Laura said. They'll dig up everything, my mental health, my marriage, even my parenting. Nina squeezed her hand. Then we fight back with receipts. Ralston nodded. They built their empire on silence. You just broke it with your voice. Laura smiled faintly. Then let's make sure it echoes. By the week's end, the Oregon State Attorney's Office had announced an official investigation. Dr. Edward Voss was suspended. Senator Mitchell's committee assignments were revoked. And for the first time, the Benton case was reclassified, from missing person to criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice. But victory came with cost. Laura's family, her husband and daughter, had to relocate under protection after anonymous threats. Alicia was flooded with reporters, forcing the commune into lockdown. Still, the truth was out. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Laura Benton could breathe without fear. That night, as she watched the city lights from her motel balcony, Nina reflected on what Laura had said earlier. Silence is how they win. Maybe that was the heart of it, not just Laura's story, but all of them. All the women erased, rewritten, or dismissed for the comfort of men in power. The confession had started a fire. But fires, Nina knew, could cleanse, or consume. And somewhere in the dark, she could feel the system shifting, uneasy under the weight of its own secrets. The morning after Laura's televised confession, Portland didn't wake up, it jolted. Every radio station, every headline, every podcast had one name on repeat. Laura Benton. The woman who had vanished into thin air had reappeared, not as a victim, but as the torchbearer of a buried scandal that now threatened to engulf Oregon's political elite. But beneath the noise, something colder was stirring. In a sleek office overlooking the Willamette River, Senator Patrick Mitchell stared at the glowing city skyline with the calm precision of a man who had weathered worse storms. Or so he told himself. Across from him sat Dr. Edward Voss, the recently suspended chairman of the Oregon Health Licensing Board. His suit was immaculate, his smile thin. "This can still be contained," Voss said. Mitchell turned slowly. "Contained? The woman you swore was gone forever just told the entire state you were at that house." Voss didn't flinch. "Containment doesn't mean denial, Senator. It means diversion." He opened a folder, revealing a set of documents, photos of Laura, printed screenshots of her commune, and a page titled Psychiatric Evaluation, Laura Benton, 2010. "She suffered from postpartum depression after her daughter's birth," Voss said smoothly. "With a little guidance, we can suggest this entire narrative is the fabrication of an unstable woman." Mitchell studied the papers, jaw tightening. "And the detective? The journalist?" Voss smiled faintly. "Collateral narratives. Everyone has a weakness." Back at the Alicia commune in New Mexico, the world felt suddenly smaller. Reporters camped outside the gates, drones buzzed overhead, and every woman inside felt the weight of exposure. Alicia had always promised anonymity, a haven for those fleeing abuse, but now it was trending on Twitter. Laura sat in the communal kitchen, her tea gone cold, as Nina Clark read messages off her laptop. "Half the internet believes you," Nina said. "The other half thinks you're part of some conspiracy." Laura gave a tired smile. "It's funny. You tell the truth, and suddenly everyone's a detective." A young woman across the table, Tara, one of the commune's newer residents, spoke softly. "They won't stop, will they?" Laura shook her head. "Not until they've made me disappear again." Meanwhile, Detective Ralston sat in his car outside the Multnomah County Courthouse, watching men in dark suits enter through a private entrance. He recognized one of them, Alan Keene, Voss's longtime attorney, and one of the most connected fixers in the state. Ralston muttered to himself, "They're circling the wagons." He dialed Nina. "They're already setting up a counterstrike. Be careful. These people don't just ruin careers. They bury them." By nightfall, it began. The first smear article appeared on a fringe website. "The myth of the missing midwife, a troubled woman's descent into paranoia." Within hours, dozens of anonymous accounts amplified it across social media. Fake psychiatric files, doctored photos, and false claims about Alicia being a cult spread like wildfire. Then came the hit piece on Nina. Journalist behind Benton story faces ethics probe, alleged fabrication of sources. Her editor received calls from concerned officials. Her press credentials were quietly suspended, pending review. The message was clear: sit down or be silenced. In a dim motel outside Albuquerque, Nina stared at her laptop, shaking. "They're erasing me in real time," she said. Laura placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now you understand why I ran." Nina met her gaze. "And now you understand why I can't." Across the state line, Senator Mitchell convened a private meeting with key donors. "We let this spiral," he said. "Voss will take the fall, and we'll restore order. The public forgets fast." But one of the donors, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper voice, leaned forward. "You underestimate the internet, Senator. The narrative's out. You can't kill a ghost twice." Mitchell's phone buzzed before he could respond. A message from an unknown number. "She's not your biggest problem anymore." Attached was a single image, a still from a security camera, timestamped that morning. It showed Daniel Mitchell, his son, meeting someone in a coffee shop. That someone was Edward Voss. Meanwhile, Nina's phone buzzed again. An anonymous tip. "If you want proof of the cover-up, check the archives at Providence Hospital. File room 3B, cabinet 214. Before they make it vanish." Ralston didn't hesitate. "We're going." They arrived after midnight, slipping past security with old IDs and a shared pulse of adrenaline. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and secrets. In room 3B, they found it, a dusty cabinet with bent metal handles. Inside were sealed folders labeled with case numbers. One stood out, #LM, 1437, Benton, Laura/Mitchell, Hannah. Ralston opened it carefully. Inside were hospital records showing that Hannah Mitchell's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, not a fall, as reported. There were photos. Medical scans. A blood test report showing traces of sedatives in Hannah's system that didn't match anything prescribed. And then a final page, signed by Dr. Edward Voss himself, certifying the cause of collapse as hypertensive stress. Nina whispered, "He rewrote the cause of injury." Ralston nodded grimly. He didn't just cover for Mitchell. He falsified medical evidence. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ralston grabbed the file. "We're not alone." They ducked into a stairwell just as two men in suits entered the room. One of them said, "Voss wants everything gone by morning." Nina's pulse thundered. "They're cleaning house." By dawn, the evidence was safe, copied, encrypted, and sent to trusted journalists across 3 states. Nina didn't sleep. Neither did Laura. That morning, the Oregon State Attorney announced a federal inquiry into the Benton case. The same hour, Dr. Edward Voss was found dead in his car outside his Lake Oswego home. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Officially ruled suicide. But Ralston knew better. He was silenced before he could talk. The investigation accelerated. Emails surfaced showing that Voss had been pressured by the Mitchell campaign to neutralize potential reputational risks. Bank records linked donations from health industry PACs directly to licensing board members. And then came the biggest revelation, one leaked voicemail from Senator Mitchell to Voss, time-stamped a week after Laura vanished. "You promised me this would never resurface. Make sure it doesn't. Whatever it takes." The message was authenticated. The senator's career, overnight, was in flames. As the sun set over Portland that evening, Laura stood by the river with Nina and Ralston, the city skyline reflecting on the water. "They'll call him a monster," Laura said quietly. But he wasn't alone. Monsters need systems. Nina nodded. And systems need breaking. Ralston smiled faintly. "You've done more damage with one truth than I did in 30 years with a badge." Laura looked at the horizon, a storm rolling in. "It's not over yet." She was right. Because with the senator exposed, and Voss gone, someone else still lingered in the shadows, someone who knew Laura had not told the entire story. And that missing piece, still buried in the night she vanished, was about to change everything. Rain always seems to fall hardest when the truth is about to break. By the time dawn rolled over Portland, the city was blanketed in gray, heavy clouds pressing down like a warning. The local news cycle had devolved into chaos. Every station carried the same headline, the same stunned tone. Senator Patrick Mitchell under federal investigation for obstruction, fraud, and tampering with state records. The once untouchable patriarch of Oregon politics was cornered. But as Nina Clark and Detective Ralston both knew too well, cornered animals don't surrender, they bite. Laura Benton watched it unfold from her temporary safe house, a plain apartment above a laundromat on S.E. Belmont. The city outside hummed with sirens and speculation. On the small TV, the senator's spokesperson read a prepared statement. The senator maintains his innocence and is cooperating fully with investigators. Laura muted it. "Cooperating," she muttered, her voice dripping with disbelief. "They're probably shredding evidence as he speaks." Ralston handed her a coffee. "You've already done what no one else could, Laura. You tore the curtain down." She stared into the cup. "Then why does it feel like the play's still going?" That evening, a manila envelope arrived at Nina's door. No return address. Inside was a flash drive labeled, "For Clark." When she plugged it in, a single video file appeared. Timestamp June 21, 2014, 11:52 p.m. The night Laura Benton disappeared. Her stomach knotted. "Oh my God." Ralston leaned in beside her as the video played. It was grainy security footage from a street camera, showing a dark sedan idling outside Hannah Mitchell's house. Moments later, a woman, Laura, ran out, clutching her bag, looking over her shoulder. Behind her, 2 men in suits followed. One of them was unmistakably Edward Voss. But then, seconds later, another figure stepped into frame. Tall. Coat collar turned up. The face hidden. The man grabbed Laura's arm, whispered something, and pointed toward the woods. She hesitated, then ran. Ralston froze the frame. The man's watch glinted in the light, gold, with a distinct seal engraved on the face. Nina zoomed in. The state senate insignia. Ralston exhaled slowly. That's not Voss. That's Mitchell. The senator himself had been there. That night? Meanwhile, at his Lake Oswego mansion, Senator Mitchell sat in a darkened study, surrounded by unopened whiskey bottles and unopened calls. His world, carefully curated for decades, was collapsing in real time. His son Daniel paced the floor, eyes wild. You said this would go away. Patrick slammed his hand against the desk. It should have. You were supposed to control yourself that night. Daniel stopped pacing. His voice trembled. She wasn't supposed to, she wasn't supposed to. The senator's expression hardened. Enough. You're not the victim here. You're the liability. Daniel's face twisted with panic. What are you saying? I'm saying if I have to choose between my son and survival, I choose survival. Daniel's mouth fell open. You wouldn't. Patrick Mitchell picked up his phone. You'd be surprised what a politician will do when he's losing. That same night, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the city lights blink through the rain, her thoughts spiraling back to that night 8 years ago, the blood, the threats, the sound of Hannah Mitchell's shallow breathing. But there was one thing she hadn't told Nina or Ralston. One secret she'd buried even from herself. She picked up her phone and called Nina. There's something you need to know. When Nina arrived, Laura's hands were trembling. I didn't just run because I was afraid, she began. I ran because someone told me to, and I believed him. Who? Nina asked. Laura's voice broke. Patrick Mitchell. The senator. He told me he'd take care of everything if I left town. He said the board would protect me, that they'd frame it as burnout or breakdown. He said I could start over, that no one would get hurt if I stayed gone. Nina blinked. He personally told you that? Yes, Laura whispered. That's why I ran that night. Not just from the men in suits, from him. He told me to disappear. I thought he was saving me. Ralston rubbed his temples. He didn't save you, Laura. He buried you alive. The following morning, Nina and Ralston presented the flash drive and Laura's new statement to the federal investigators. The evidence was undeniable. The senator had been at the scene, had orchestrated Laura's disappearance, and had manipulated the entire licensing board to cover it up. But as always, the truth came at a cost. By midday, Nina's phone exploded with notifications, leaked texts, private messages, and a new headline. Journalist in Benton case linked to fabricated evidence. Her email had been hacked. The video file leaked online with claims it had been digitally altered. Someone inside the investigation was feeding the senator's team. That night, Nina sat in her car in the rain, exhaustion weighing her down. They'll twist everything, she murmured. Even the truth. Ralston looked at her from the passenger seat. Then we take it out of their hands. We go public, everything. The footage, the files, the threats. All of it. Nina hesitated. Once we do that, there's no going back. He smiled grimly. There never was. At 9 p.m., Nina went live on her independent channel. No sponsors. No editor. Just truth. She uploaded everything, the footage, the documents, the testimonies. She narrated every detail, not with drama, but with quiet fury. For 8 years, a midwife was branded missing, unstable, forgotten. But Laura Benton wasn't crazy. She was silenced. And the people who did it weren't criminals in the shadows, they were men in suits, in offices, with titles and budgets and immunity. This isn't a mystery anymore. It's a reckoning. The video went viral overnight. Within 24 hours, it had 10 million views. Federal agents raided the senator's mansion 2 days later. He was arrested on charges of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and falsification of medical records. His son Daniel turned himself in soon after, the weight of guilt finally breaking what privilege had once protected. The Oregon Health Licensing Board was dissolved. Dozens of officials resigned or faced charges. And for the first time, Laura Benton's name appeared on the evening news, not under missing, but under survivor. But victory is rarely clean. As the headlines faded and the system began its slow, awkward process of reform, Nina received one final message, a simple text from an unknown number. You think the board was the only one? Attached was a photo of a file labeled Project Persephone, Women's Health Oversight Committee, 2009. Nina stared at it, her pulse rising. What is this? Ralston sighed. It means it's bigger than we thought. Laura looked out the window, the rain easing into a fine mist. For the first time, she said softly, I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. Nina nodded. Good. Because it's coming. The storm had passed, but the reckoning had just begun. It had been 3 months since Senator Patrick Mitchell's arrest, and Portland was a different city. Not quieter, no. The city hummed with a new kind of noise, the sound of reckoning. Reporters camped outside government offices, talk shows debated ethics reform, and protesters marched through downtown holding signs that read, "Truth costs. Pay it. Justice for Laura. Reform the board." The Oregon Health Licensing Board, once an untouchable fortress of bureaucracy, had been dismantled, its archives seized by federal agents. Every file, every erased name, every silenced complaint now stood under investigation. And through it all, Laura Benton remained the calm center of a political hurricane. On a rainy Thursday morning, she stood in the corridor of the Multnomah County Courthouse, wearing a modest navy dress and holding a single folder. Inside were her written statements, not the ones prepared by lawyers, but her own, handwritten, trembling but resolute. Detective Ralston approached, now officially reinstated as a consultant for the federal inquiry. "You ready?" he asked. Laura took a deep breath. "I've been running for 8 years, Marcus. I'm done being ready. I'm just here." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a woman about to change history." She shrugged. "Maybe I just want to change the ending." When Laura took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. The prosecutors called her a living witness to institutional rot. The defense called her a disturbed woman rewriting trauma. But when Laura began to speak, even the defense attorneys looked down. "I'm not a hero," she said, voice steady. "I was a midwife. I helped women bring life into the world. Until one night, I watched someone nearly take it away. They told me to run, so I did. They told me to stay silent, so I did. But silence isn't peace. It's rot. It's the sound of justice decaying from the inside. I came back because I realized something. Truth doesn't save you. It tests you. And if the system can't handle one woman speaking, then maybe it's the system that's broken, not the woman." There was no applause, no outburst. Just stillness, the heavy kind that follows something undeniably true. Outside, Nina Clark waited with her camera crew, broadcasting the trial for her independent channel. The same network that had once suspended her credentials now begged for interviews. She declined every one of them. When Laura stepped out of the courthouse, they shared a long, silent look, two women who had both lost and found themselves in the same storm. Nina lowered her camera. "You did it." Laura smiled softly. "No. We did." By evening, the Senate Ethics Committee announced its verdict. Senator Patrick Mitchell was found guilty on 5 counts of corruption and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His son, Daniel, accepted a plea deal, admitting to aggravated assault and obstruction of justice. He received 6 years and the promise of early parole for cooperating. Edward Voss's death was officially ruled undetermined, and whispers of a larger network of political medical collusion began to surface. Portland's most infamous scandal had cracked open something far deeper, a national conversation about oversight, accountability, and the quiet power of systems built to protect themselves. Weeks later, Laura returned to Alicia, the commune in New Mexico where her second life had begun. But this time, she wasn't hiding. She came as a guest speaker. Under a vast desert sky, she addressed the women gathered around the fire pit, survivors, runaways, and dreamers. "They'll tell you you're too small to change anything," she said. "But that's how power survives, by making you believe your voice is an echo instead of a thunderclap. Speak anyway. Even if your hands shake." The women applauded softly, a sound like wine through the canyon, fragile but unstoppable. Later that night, Tara, the young woman who'd once feared Laura's fame would doom Alicia, approached her. "Do you ever regret coming back?" Laura smiled faintly. "Every day I didn't come back was the real regret." Meanwhile, in Portland, Detective Marcus Ralston finally cleaned out his old office. He found the original case file, Benton, Laura, missing person, still stamped closed in red ink. He crossed it out with a thick black marker and wrote a single word above it. Solved. As he packed the last of his things, his phone buzzed. A message from Nina? "You should see this." Attached was a news alert. The U.S. Department of Health had announced the creation of a National Medical Oversight Reform Act, informally dubbed the Benton Bill. Its purpose, to protect whistleblowers in healthcare, ensure transparency in licensing boards, and prevent political interference in patient safety investigations. Ralston chuckled under his breath. Not bad, Midwife. Not bad at all. Nina's career, too, had been reborn. Her channel, The Quiet Truth, became a digital haven for investigative journalism, funded not by sponsors, but by the very audience that had watched her fight the machine. In her pinned post, she wrote, "Truth doesn't pay well. But it pays back." One night, as she was editing footage, an envelope slipped under her apartment door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The board wasn't the beginning. Look into Project Persephone. They've been hiding something since 2009. She stared at it for a long time, her heart quickening. Then she smiled. Guess we're not done yet. Months later, Laura sat alone at the edge of the desert at dusk, watching the horizon bleed orange and gold. The world still carried scars, her scars, but for once, she wasn't defined by them. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old midwife's badge, the one she'd left behind that night in Portland. It was scratched, sun-faded, but still intact. She placed it in the sand and whispered, "For every woman who was told to stay quiet." Then she smiled, stood, and walked back toward the lights of the commune, toward the future she'd built out of fear, courage, and truth. As the screen fades to black, one final quote appears. "The cost of truth isn't silence. It's everything that silence protects." Laura Benton, 2023.